Hello and welcome back to The Deep Dive. I'm your host, and this is episode 3 of our deep dive of Flutterflow.
And today our mission is pure architecture. We are really getting into the weeds of Flutterflow, not just the apps it makes, but the IDE itself, the actual internal structure that makes it all possible.
Exactly. We've been looking at how this platform is really engineered to bridge that gap between, say, rapid prototyping and serious production-ready software.
It's a visual abstraction layer, but,
Yeah.
and this is the key point, it doesn't lose fidelity with the underlying Flutter framework. You still have access to the entire Dart ecosystem.
Which is the classic problem with low-code, isn't it? You get speed, but you hit a wall.
You do. And Flutterflow seems to tackle this by imposing a professional structure from the very beginning. It organizes the complexity of Flutter using principles that, they mimic scalable software design.
Okay, let's unpack that structure. The first thing that jumped out at me was the UI building part. It looks almost identical to concepts like atomic design.
It is. It's all about consistency and reusability right from the start. And enforcing that hierarchy is absolutely key to managing technical debt down the line. We can break it down into 4 distinct levels.
Okay, so what's at the very bottom?
At the bottom, you have the atoms. These are your basic widgets, the smallest possible things. A text field, an icon, a single piece of text. They can't be broken down any further.
Right. And you take those atoms, you stick them together, and you
You
get...
get molecules.
Yep.
These are simple functional groups. You might combine an icon and a text field to create a dedicated email sign-in field. That's a molecule.
A search bar would be another one.
Exactly. Then you take those molecules and you build organisms, which Flutterflow just calls components. Those are the complex, reusable sections of your app.
Like a full login component with email and password molecules, or maybe a product list card that has an image, text, a button.
Precisely. And because that product list card is one component, one organism, if you change its font in one place, that change propagates everywhere you've used it.
And then all of that comes together to build the final pages, or what Flutter calls a scaffold.
Right. The home page, the profile screen, that's the complete user experience built from all those smaller, consistent parts.
Okay, I have a fundamental question about this. When I'm in the builder and I drag an icon onto the canvas, what am I actually dragging? The blueprint, or the specific thing? Our sources mentioned a nuance here, something about classes versus instances.
That is a critical distinction to make. In the widget palette, you're looking at the widget class. That's the template, the idea of an icon.
The blueprint.
To the blueprint. But when you drag it onto the canvas, you create a unique instance of that class.
I see. So the instance inherits all the fundamental iconness from the class, but I can go into the properties panel and make this specific instance blue and that one over there red.
Precisely. The instance has its own unique configurable properties, its size, its color, its padding, while still relying on that consistent class foundation. That's how you get both reusability and highly unique designs.
That makes sense. That's a foundational concept.
Oh.
All right, so let's zoom out and look at the IDE itself. The whole environment seems to be split into 4 main regions that map pretty closely to a standard development workflow.
Yeah, you've got the navigation menu on the left, the toolbar at the top, the canvas in the middle, and the properties panel on the right. Let's start with that vertical spine, the navigation menu.
That's the gateway to pretty much everything, right? Not just UI.
Not at all. You have your UI builder, of course, and the widget tree, which is so important.
Oh, the widget tree is a lifesaver. When you have things stacked on top of each other and you can't click what you need on the canvas, it shows you that exact parent-child hierarchy.
Absolutely. But then you scroll down that menu and you find the real professional depth. You've got dedicated sections for Firestore, for API calls. There's even a Postman-like interface right in the builder.
I saw that. And the sections for custom functions and the AI agent builder, that's where you go to break out of the visual constraints when you need to.
Exactly. Now, moving to the top, you have the toolbar. It's your command and control. And I love the little details here, like if you just hover over the project name.
It tells you everything, the Git branch you're on, the environment, even the specific Flutterflow and Flutter SDK versions.
That kind of transparency is crucial for teams, for debugging. And for pure speed, there's the command palette.
Command K.
Or Control K. It lets you search for any widget, any action, any setting without digging through menus. It's a huge time saver.
The toolbar is also where you handle testing. And they split it into 2 modes, test mode and run mode.
Right. Test mode is for that super fast iteration. It uses Flutter's instant reload, so it's great for UI tweaks. But for final verification, you really need run mode, which does a full stable build.
And there's also that project suggestions feature. It's like having a little performance consultant built in.
It is. It'll flag things like inefficient backend queries, or, and this is a classic Flutter issue, it'll warn you about widgets with unbounded size, which can crash your app.
That's a huge help, especially for people who might not have a deep engineering background.
It really is. Okay, let's look at the heart of it all, the canvas. It's more than just a drawing area, it's a simulation tool. The display device toggle is mandatory.
Yeah, you had to see how your design looks inside an actual iPhone frame or on an Android tablet.
And more importantly, it shows you the safe area. If you ignore the safe area, the part of the screen that isn't covered by a notch or a system bar, you are going to ship UI bugs. It's that simple.
And for getting really specific with responsiveness, there are those resize handlebars.
Yes, you can just drag the screen to any custom size to see how your layout adapts. It's essential for making sure you support all the different devices out there.
The Canvas also have some vital accessibility tools. I was impressed by the larger font visualization toggle.
That's a big one. It shows you exactly what your UI looks like when a user cranks up the text size on their device. It forces you to check for text overflowing or layouts breaking. It makes you treat text size as a variable, not a constant.
Okay, so we've covered the static structure. Let's make the jump to dynamic behavior. This is where we talk about the action flow editor. For me, this is what really earns Flutterflow the title of an IDE.
I agree. It's a visual node-based system for building your application's logic. And every sequence has to start with the trigger.
The event the app is listening for. So on tap, on double tap. I even saw some advanced ones like on phone shake.
And lifecycle events like on page load. Once it's triggered, you build your flow with different action modes. The simplest is a standard action, a single operation like navigate to a page or show a snack bar.
But the real power is in flow control, like the conditional action.
That's your basic if-then-else logic. It's a Boolean check that splits the flow into a true branch and a false branch. You use it constantly for things like form validation.
What about doing things at the same time? Let's say I need to fetch user data from two different APIs. Do we have to do them one after the other?
No, and you shouldn't. That's what the parallel action is for. It executes multiple branches at the same time concurrently. It can dramatically cut down on perceived loading time for the user.
The asynchronous handling feels really elegant too. After an API call, the next node can just grab the action output variable.
Right. You don't have to manually manage passing that data around. It's just available. It abstracts away a ton of boilerplate code.
And for that data to be available, it has to live somewhere. The app needs robust state persistence.
And they've stratified this really well into three scopes. First, you have global properties. These are built-in read-only variables. Things like, is user logged in, or the current device location.
Environmental context, basically.
Exactly. Then you have your own app state variables. These persist for the entire session. This is where you'd put a shopping cart, for example, something that needs to survive as the user navigates around.
And finally, the most temporary scope is page or local state variables.
Right. These are destroyed the moment you leave the screen. They're perfect for temporary UI logic, like a Boolean variable to track if a filter panel is expanded or not.
That stratification is so important. Mixing local UI state with persistent global data is a recipe for bugs.
It's a huge source of them. Flutterflow forces you into good habits here.
Speaking of good habits, let's talk about the boundary. The moment the visual builder isn't enough for some advanced feature, how do you extend the platform?
Well, it provides several very robust extension points. The most common are custom functions. These are for pure Dart logic, complex calculations, string formatting, things like that.
And then there are custom actions.
Which are similar, but they're built specifically to be dropped into that action flow editor we just talked about. They're perfect for interacting with hardware, like an NFC scanner, or doing some complex data transformation.
And for UI, if you need a special chart or something from the community.
That's where custom widgets come in. You can pull in almost any package from pub.dev, the main Flutter repository, and use it in your project.
Okay, this is all great for logic and UI, but the real power move, the thing that confirms this is a professional IDE, is the direct native file access.
Absolutely. This is the escape hatch that most low-code tools are terrified to give you. It means you can directly edit the core configuration files for Android and iOS.
We're talking about getting your hands on the Android manifest.xml file.
Yes, you need to edit that to manage system permissions, to define deep linking intent filters. You simply cannot build a serious integrated Android app without access to that file.
And it's the same for the info.plist on iOS, right? For writing those usage descriptions when you ask for camera permission.
Exactly. Or the entitlements.plist for things like push notifications. And for the real power users, you can even edit main.dart.
The entry point for the entire Flutter app.
The very first file that runs. This lets you do app-level initialization, like locking the screen orientation or setting up a third-party SDK before any UI even renders. It's full control.
So how do you manage changes to these files safely? Because one typo in an XML file can, brick the entire build.
They give you two methods. The safer one is using snippets. This lets you inject small, specific lines of code like a single permission into predefined locations. It's much harder to mess up.
But if you need to do something more complex,
then you use manual edit mode. This unlocks the whole raw file, but, and this is a huge warning, you have to be extremely careful. If you relock the file later, Flutterflow overwrites your manual changes. It's a trade-off between power and risk.
And what about security? You don't want to hard-code an API key into one of those files.
No, and you don't have to. They use variable injection. You define your secret keys as environment values, and then in the native file, you just use a placeholder like Mapbox access token. It keeps your secrets out of the code base.
That's a crucial best practice. Okay, let's move to our final section, polish and deployment. Let's start with widget animations.
Right. And these are so much more than just decoration. They guide the user's eye, they provide feedback. It's all driven by the Flutter Animate package.
The list of effects is pretty comprehensive. You've got fade, slide, scale, rotate. I particularly like shimmer for loading states and shake for form errors.
They're great for feedback. And the timing control is very flexible. You can run multiple effects simultaneously, or you can stagger them so they run one after the other.
And this is where it gets really clever for dynamic lists of data, the staggered dynamic data technique.
This is what makes a UI feel truly polished. You can set the animation delay using a variable. So for a list, you can use a formula like index 100 milliseconds.
So the first item appears instantly, the next 100 meters later, the third 200 meters later.
And you get this beautiful, smooth cascade effect as the list loads in. It's a very professional touch.
It really is. Okay, finally, let's talk about getting users into the app, specifically deep linking.
This is critical for marketing today. Since Firebase dynamic links were deprecated, the common solution is to self-host some verification files on a server.
The Apple App Site Association and assetlinks.json files.
Those are the ones. But that can be a pain, and it doesn't handle things like deferred linking, where the link still works, even if the user has to install the app first.
So what's the recommended solution for that?
For that level of power, the sources all point to branch.io, and Flutterflow has a deep integration for it. You can configure your branch key and other settings using those secure environment variables we talked about.
I see. So you use a powerful third-party service, but Flutterflow makes the configuration straightforward.
Exactly. And a really important reminder, you have to test deep links on a real physical device or a full emulator. They just don't work reliably in a simple test mode.
Wow. Okay, we've really covered the whole anatomy here, from the tiniest widget all the way to complex deployment pipelines. It feels like Flutterflow really does succeed in organizing the power of Flutter into a visual language.
I think so. It works for designers who want speed, but it also provides the depth and control that software architects need.
And for a final thought, something that really underscores that professional focus. You pointed me to the general settings menu.
Right, the min and max text scaling factor controls.
You can cap the maximum text scaling factor up to 10 times.
Which sounds like a small detail, but it's profound. It means you can guarantee that even if a user enables huge text magnification for accessibility, your app's layout won't completely shatter and become unusable.
That's a true professional insight. It's not just about compliance, it's about making sure your app actually works for everyone under real-world conditions.
It ensures that consistency we talked about at the very beginning, but for every single user.
That's a perfect place to end it. That wraps up our deep dive into the anatomy of the Flutterflow IDE. Thank you for dissecting all of this with us.
It was a pleasure. It was great to explore the complexity behind all the visuals.
And to our listeners, subscribe for more video and podcast.